Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on, or good evening, wherever you are. So my name is Matt Carlisle from Kundal. I'm the Associate Director here in Singapore, and today we are doing this webinar on a very interesting topic, which is navigating hospitality's journey to net zero. So for today's discussion, we have my four distinguished panelists who should have a really good spread of discussion points and talking points today. So I guess it'd be nice to get everyone to do a little brief introduction of themselves. So I guess, Mario, do you want to go first from the left?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Matt. Really a pleasure to be here today and giving this webinar and joining these distinguished panelists as well. So my name is Mario Saab. I head up the sustainability business in Kundal for the MENA region, looking after everything that has to do really with the sustainability for buildings, master plans, designs, net zero carbon targets, everything. So very glad to be here and looking forward to a very interesting discussion.
Perfect. Thanks, Mario. Cindy, how about you go next?
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. My name is Cindy Vendwell. I'm the Environmental Social Governance Manager for ProInvest Group. So ProInvest Group is a private equity investment management firm, and we have about 3 billion assets under management under various structures. And so the purpose of my role is really connecting our ESG strategies and making sure that across our full platform that covers the full hotel asset life cycle, that we implement those ESG strategies. So very keen to speak about that today, and also to hear from the other panelists on this call as well. Thanks, Matt.
Super. Thanks, Cindy. Jamie, you're next.
Yes, good morning from Dubai, everybody. I'm Jamie Ford. I'm the Global Head of Engineering for Kerzner International, an international hotel operator operating such brands as Atlantis and One and Only, Cyro and Rare Finds globally. I lead the engineering function, as my job title suggests, but also drive the sustainability platform and have implemented it for the group for the last 5.5 to 6 years. So super excited to hear today's conversations with the panelists and the group we've got on the call. So looking forward to the conversations. Thanks, Matt.
Good stuff, Jamie. And Randy, last but not least.
Yes, hi, Randy Durbin, the CEO of GSTC, the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. I'm based in South Korea, and the GSTC was created, we're a nonprofit organization created by 2 UN agencies, UN Environment and UN Tourism, in 2007 to develop global standards for sustainable tourism. So we do that, plus we provide guidance for good certification through an accreditation program. And I myself have been 40 years in travel and tourism, a quarter century before my dozen years in sustainable tourism. I was a manager and executive with leisure tour operators and served on boards in Europe, North America, and Asia. And every brand I ever worked for operated on all 7 continents. So I've done countless amounts of site inspections and contracting with hotels around the world. So I've been touching upon hospitality for a long time. Nice to be with you.
Good stuff, guys. I mean, I think the spread here of knowledge and experience is really great. We've got everyone from consultancy through to operator to owners to sort of governance. So it's a really nice spread. And I think probably I'll show everyone a little bit about the process we've got for today. So the structure is perhaps a little bit different to what you would have on a normal webinar. So we've got a panel discussion where there's a bunch of questions we're going to sort of discuss with everyone on the panel and get some feedback. And because what we found is that a lot of times people want to have case studies. They want to understand and learn from specific projects or or bits of work that some of the panels have done. So we've actually got a case study section here in our section today, and then we've got some time at the end for a little bit of Q&A. To give you a little bit of a heads up on the case studies, so these are the 4 that each of the panelists have sort of come prepared to talk about. So it's not a presentation as such, but really just some talking points about the learnings, some of the key things that they did on the project or as part of that process, and how it relates back to some of the questions we'll chat about. So we'll come to that at the end. So we can probably kick off the discussion today. So I guess Randy, I wanted to start the discussion with you. So, GSTC, works across global markets, helping national, regional hospitality boards. So I suppose, given you've got this sort of overview of the marketplace, can you give us an overview of I guess what's happening nationally in terms of roadmaps, regulations, carrot and sticks? What are different areas of the globe doing in terms of driving the net zero ambition?
Yeah, if I could, just before I touch upon the governments, we also work with the private sector, kind of almost 360 on hotels, because we have members that include IHG and Hilton and Accor. We have members that are buyers on the leisure side and business travel, from Amex GBT to EasyJet Holidays in the UK and many other leisure tour operators and distributors. We've really kind of worked with Booking.com and others in developing how they mark sustainability. We'd like to get more into the hotel investors group. We're kind of making moves in that direction, but we look at hospitality from mostly a 360-degree angle. But that includes governments. And really, I think we're seeing the most change through regulation, because honestly, I don't think the industry has moved aggressively enough to collaborate across those lines of the hotels, the buyers, the distributors, to figure out systematic sustainability. So governments are stepping in. A lot of our stakeholders are in an absolute panic about what's happening with the EU Green Claims Directive. It's not targeted at hospitality, it's at all products, largely about too many products in the supermarket in Europe saying bio on them, but it will impact hospitality pretty dramatically, because when this goes into effect, a hotel cannot speak about being green or sustainable without having that backed up by a third-party verification. The rules for that are not settled. We don't know exactly where it's going to land, but there's a great deal of panic. But we're seeing a great deal of movement at the national level. A couple of little countries that we worked with is Mauritius and Malta, many other countries involved, but the biggest fish that we've really seen really interesting movement is in Turkey, or Turkey, as Turkey wants to be called these days, and Singapore. So I'll give the case study of Singapore later, but Turkey is fascinating. They've legally mandated that every hotel in the country, 18,000 plus properties, must be certified to our accredited system by 2030, taking things in stages. It's a legal mandate. The parliament passed legislation about 5 years ago to give the Ministry of Tourism the power to revoke a business license. So you asked me, Matt, to talk about the carrot and the stick. Well, with the carrot, I'll give the Singapore example later. The stick, of course, is a legal mandate to say you will participate in the sustainability program to its fullest, or you lose your business license. But it's a pretty exciting program. So if a government is going to take such a strong stick, I'm delighted that it's about sustainability. So each hotel in the country must go through a stage 1 by next month. It's been in place for almost 2 years, a year and a half plus, that they have to show compliance to about 1/3 of our standard. And then they'll have 2 years to show compliance to about 2/3 of the standard. And then by 2030, every hotel in the country has to have a fully holistic, well-audited, full certification based on certification bodies that we've accredited. So other governments around the world are looking at that, and we're getting a lot of interest along those lines. So regulation is coming, and again, I would attribute it to the fact that the industry has not organized itself to take a very systematic approach. So regulators are stepping in, and it comes from kind of 2 angles to wrap up. It's either ministries of environment that are concerned about environmental impacts, or now we're seeing with this EU Green Claims Directive and the Competitive Markets Authority in the UK, more about consumer protection, about false claims and so forth. So we're seeing those 2 very different sides, but both are really picking up a great deal of steam, and I think we'll see more of it.
It's good to hear. And I like I mean, you're right, I guess like you said, it's the carrot and stick approach, the stick removing your business license. And I guess, the other side of it, I suppose, is incentive schemes. And I wanted to hear from Cindy a little bit about the Australian context of that, because I know there's been, I guess the Australian context maybe has taken a little bit more of an incentive approach rather than stick. But Cindy, a little bit about like, I guess, your 24 operational hotels that you have as part of the fund, and a little bit about, I guess, like the net zero path that you've seen the Australian government and New Zealand governments take, what's happening with regulations and certifications, and I guess about how, I guess, you've adapted your fund structure and strategy towards that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. And thanks, Randy, for that overview as well. In Australia and New Zealand, the governors have definitely set their respective targets. So for instance, in Australia, their net zero targets is 2050. And then they also have their intermittent targets as well by 2035. For instance, they have to reduce emissions by X% across various sectors. That doesn't translate too well from a hotel industry perspective, I think, because again, it's very broad on a national level. But what we have seen, which has taken the industry by storm over the last few months and 12 months really, has been those state level incentives and regulations really taking charge. So for instance, on the 1st of October 2023, the New South Wales state government introduced their New South Wales Sustainable Building Set, which basically mandates NABERS energy ratings and net zero targets to be factored into any DA applications and approval processes for hotels. So there's a very clear guideline for hotels to now actually contribute towards this net zero goal on a state-by-state basis. New South Wales is definitely leading the charge. A few other states are lagging behind, unfortunately, but we've seen that really boost the conversations across the industry and different associations to really start participating. And I think that goes to Randy's point as well on the verification component of your net zero strategies and just what you're generally communicating from a sustainability perspective. Is we're seeing a lot more reliance from different agencies, institutional investors as well, debt financiers, relying on these third-party certification schemes or rating schemes to verify your sustainability journey. NABERS has been a big one for Australia, which stands for National Australian Built Environmental Rating System, which looks at your energy efficiency, your water efficiency, and then also carbon neutrality. But then we've also seen a few other schemes such as Green Star performance schemes come into play also. For Pro-Invest Group specifically, we've always had a commitment to NABERS ratings, even when it wasn't too popular in the hotel sector. And that's also helped us really, I suppose, get the attention of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, which they're a specialist investor actually supporting the Australian government's net zero by 2050 strategy. So they invest in projects that help that decarbonation plan. So you asked about our strategy and how we actually went about it. We started off with our first fund of hotels. There was about 8 new built hotels in that fund. All of them had the target of achieving a 4.5-star NABERS energy rating, which NABERS looks at it from a 1 to 6-star scale. 4.5 for us was about relatively best practice. CFC, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, came in on board for one of our projects, the Holiday Inn Express Melbourne South Bank project, and provided about $39 million in debt finance for that project to lift its target from 4.5 to 5-star NABERS energy. That equates to about a 25% uplift in energy efficiency, which has been substantial. So we went through that process, actually had Kundal involved in that process as well to develop a really nice roadmap to uplift our energy efficiency on that asset. And so we started using that as a case study when we started developing the strategies for a second fund. The Clean Energy Finance Corporation came on board again for Fund 2 as well, and we actually lifted our entire process. So we mandated that all Australian hotels in Fund 2 actually target a 5-star NABERS energy rating and also set clear net zero targets and strategies. And we also had other things such as reporting to GRESB and making sure our sustainability reports are in track and everything. And we also have a really strong governance framework to back that up as well, which we've used all those findings and learnings as a case study for our Fund 3, which has led us to also consider and revamp our entire net zero strategy to be aligned to the Science Based Targets Initiative. So with all of those, I believe there's definitely a lot of key drivers and benefits and incentives that could be tapped in. I don't believe it's isolated just to the Australian market. We're seeing these benefits come in form of green loans and various institutional investors, piquing interest and putting their money where they want. And it really needs to be from well across the globe. So I think there's definitely a lot of traction happening, but we need a little bit more movement, which is great that we're actually having this call as well.
Yeah, it's good. I really like this. Like when we had these chats, I really like that there was this development of the funds and how your approach kind of evolved and sort of got more ambitious as you went through. And definitely this point of like national structures being put in place and incentive schemes. And it was like I wanted them to hear about sort of the Dubai and Middle East context too, because Jamie, obviously Kerzner Group, owned by investment corporation of Dubai, and Dubai has
ICD.
set,
Mhm.
yeah, ICD has set like this 2050 targets. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
guess has the
exactly.
process been similar to you? Yeah, is it like this? It's filtering down into what you guys are doing as an operator?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Dubai's 2050 vision, I think similar to Cindy's comments with Australia is looking, it's put that stake in the ground for 2050. It's looking to produce 75% of its energy requirements by clean sources by 2050. So it's really ambitious, especially for this part of the world. They want to make it the global kind of center of clean energy and a green economy. The vision aims to achieve zero carbon emissions and reach 100% of clean energy by 2050. And they're driving that then through, it's obviously from governmental level. And we've seen the last 2 years them driving that through the local government level. Dubai municipality is driving a process through hospitality in particular, where we have to mandatorily input our utility data, our waste data, carbon footprint analysis from that data comes back, and that's mandatory. And Dubai, back to your point about kind of the carrot and the stick, a little bit of the stick there. In some regards, if you're non-compliant, then you can be hit with some serious fines. Dubai municipality have quite a big remit. And they will come and conduct audits on properties randomly. So I find that works very well for us. But the documents and the numbers that we actually input just aligns with what we currently do with our sustainability platform anyway. So it's not double work for us really. It's numbers that we've already gleaned and inputted into our sustainability platform, which is EarthCheck. So yeah, that's kind of where Dubai sits at the moment, from governmental level, local government, departmental level, pushing that down into the hospitality space. Yeah,
because like I read there's like this, the Dubai Green Fund is now $30 billion, whatever they've announced they've got funding, but it's been around for a while. Like started 2007, and you and I had this chat the other day about how it sort of didn't get as much traction, particularly in some sectors, as they would have hoped when it started. I didn't know, because like I had this same chat with Mario too about like some of the like data collection obviously not being this difficult in this region. So I guess like what were your thoughts on why it sort of it took a while to get going, I guess?
Yeah, as an operator, obviously we're based in Dubai, so we really want to, I'm being partially government owned.
Yeah.
We really want to fall in line with this, and really want to kind of be ahead of the curve where possible. So I think the Dubai Green Fund was really aggressive in reaching out to operators, and we have a whole range of owned assets, managed assets, kind of dry management agreements. Kersner, we don't have any franchised hotels, so we don't fall into that space, which is obviously a different dynamic again. So we do have a lot more of a vested interest with some really big assets here, such as Atlantis. We have 2 Atlantis here. Totaling, over kind of 2,000 plus rooms. So there's a big asset there. So Dubai Green Fund were really looking at kind of what they could do. They weren't looking at projects under $10 million. So really, really big scale, clean energy production, energy and water efficiencies, waste management. They were looking at the full, sustainable living, green transportation, green real estate, kind of sustainable agriculture also, which obviously is not into the
but not so much at building level, more sort of bigger stuff, and maybe that's where we didn't see it happening so much in the built environment.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we looked at we tried to plug them into different assets, and I know from other projects they were really struggling to gain traction kind of 2 or 3 years ago. I know that's changing a little bit more now, but definitely it was frustratingly challenging. I would say from my standpoint, really trying to get some value add projects plugged into the Green Fund. Yeah.
And it's like, it's related to sort of chats that Mario, you and I have had over the last sort of couple of weeks too. It's just like, the region in the MENA region now is sort of moving quite quickly. So I was going to ask you a little bit about like what you see like from your Dubai office. You work in KSA and Qatar all around. So I wanted to get an idea of sort of where you see it happening elsewise, but also tapping into this, I guess, this data collection issue, which is difficult when governments are trying to actually sort of implement these pathways, but also when you're coming to actually work on properties, right? So yeah, I guess like what are you saying?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I would say across the MENA region in general, there's definitely an increasing emphasis now on ESG practices and like my fellow panelists also discussed, there's several announcements of net zero carbon emission targets from several governments in the region. And they are encouraging even the private sector to integrate ESG considerations as part of their operation. So, like as an example, obviously UAE, where I sit now, you have the net zero carbon emissions by 2050, Saudi by 2060. Obviously, also the National Vision 2030 of Saudi, which is transforming a lot in the overall landscape of Saudi. Qatar National Vision 2030 as well, zero carbon targets. Even countries like Egypt and Morocco and other countries that are also trying to put targets for increasing their share of renewable energy into the overall energy mix by 2030 or 2035. So all of these targets and initiatives are obviously increasingly there, and they are very important when it comes to driving the market and even setting some trend towards, let's say, green initiatives for different sectors. One of them obviously is hospitality. But I would say till now, the trend is more about voluntary adherence and kind of market-driven initiatives rather than very strict legal mandates. While we're still seeing sometimes local rating systems, let's say like Istidama in Abu Dhabi, like Mustadam in Saudi, like GSAS in Qatar, which are being applied across several projects. But still, for example, LEED is the de facto voluntary program that is still being applied as a green rating system across pretty much most of the MENA region, especially for its international recognition and specifically in the hospitality industry, because most people worldwide, they recognize LEED, but they fail a bit to recognize the local rating systems. Now, obviously, like I said, there are already hotel initiatives and hospitality initiatives in several countries that aim at achieving net zero carbon emissions. So, for example, Dubai, we have the Dubai Sustainable Tourism by the Department of Tourism. There's also Abu Dhabi Sustainable Tourism. All of these, they encourage the hotels to adopt sustainable practices. They include some guidelines, some standards to reduce the carbon footprint of these hotels, energy efficiency measures, water efficiency, waste management. And obviously, they are incentivized as hotels to participate through recognition, through certification programs. You have the likes of also international hotel certifications like Green Key certification, for example, which already several hotels in the MENA region are obtaining this kind of certification just to demonstrate as well their commitment to sustainable practices, to net zero goals.
But it still feels like, it's like you said, it still feels a little, it's like more incentive or sort of promotion based and not mandatory.
Yes. It is. I mean, I would definitely love to see the mandatory initiatives, or let's say the mandatory target being set there, just like what Randy mentioned in Turkey, which is great. And this is definitely a very important driver for the overall market to do this. Now, some of the incentives as well would include some sort of green financing, and green financing in MENA is actually now at a pivotal stage. So we are seeing increasing governmental support, international collaboration to drive the growth of this green financing, especially with the net zero carbon target, especially with the banking industry worldwide recognizing the need to pour more money in order to actually facilitate this transition towards net zero carbon goals by 2050 and 2060. Because as we always say, net zero carbon comes at a price, and there should be more investments, there should be more financing going into the play there. As the market matures, I'm sure that we're expecting to have more investment and green financing, green loans, green sukuk in the region here as well, towards the whole transition to sustainable economy. So, in general, obviously, all of these play a pivotal role, and the national net zero visions are also driving and supporting these kinds of initiatives in the hospitality sector.
And it's interesting too, right? I guess it's like they keep coming back to this carrot and stick thing, and it's like, I guess most markets will start with incentives and then move to mandatory things before. I mean, I'm sure in Australia with Pro Invest, Cindy, that was probably the case. Definitely, I know here in Singapore with Green Mark, it was voluntary, but now we've got regulations coming in which are, because they've got good data on these buildings, they can actually pick out like the bottom performing 25% quartile of buildings, and they're going to fall under this new regulations, the mandatory energy improvement scheme. So there's going to be a fine if those properties don't do a 10% improvement over a given period. And so yeah, it's you really do need to have both, I guess, in order to get people to move the right direction. And on this idea on sort of building information and data, Cindy, I wanted to sort of talk to you a little bit about ProInvest too, because I guess like as a sophisticated investor, you and I had some chats about data usage and how you sort of leverage it in different ways about your business to sort of drive your net zero and ESG goals. So yeah, could you tell us a little bit about some insights, I guess, into how ProInvest used data differently?
Absolutely. Well, it really depends on which stage of the asset life cycle. So given that we participate in the development of the hotels, the operation, as well as asset management side, we do have a nice suite of data across the full life cycle. But I think really when it comes down to the point of operating the assets and also asset managing the assets to achieve those net zero targets, and also all the other flow on usages as well, the key ones that we use it is to optimize the assets. Leveraging it for the RFP responses from clients, especially corporate clients that are becoming a lot more sophisticated in their questions as well. And then, of course, our investor reporting requirements as well. And then also satisfying brand standard requirements, given that we do have franchised hotels in our portfolio. So we do have a bit of a duplication in data management, I suppose. But in terms of optimizing our assets, it's really about leveraging all the data that we've got across our hotels and plugging them into our sustainability management system, which we use Greenview. I know they're a global platform. They service about 25,000 hotels globally as well, which then also helps us to benchmark our assets performance, not only within our own portfolio, given that we've got a fair few across Australia and New Zealand, and we can also benchmark across different funds to make sure that they're on track, taking into consideration, the hotel industry's nuances of reporting and, energy consumption per occupied room, which I would definitely call out. When you are selecting a system, be mindful of its hotel capabilities. We had previously used a system that was very much built for office assets, and that just did not work at all. So we definitely call that out as a key learning that we've experienced. But then also filtering that data up into third-party checks, such as neighbours' ratings, and making sure that we have that external lens over the data that we do use, so that we can then confidently communicate our assets performance back to our various stakeholders as well. And I found that process really insightful, because sometimes whatever you get on your utility bills may not translate to what's actually happening on your property. For instance, one hotel, we found that the utility provider was overcharging us and overestimating our meters significantly. And then when we tracked that over a 12-month period, they ended up costing us about extra $14,000 on our water bills. So that's just one hotel. If you extrapolate that across several different properties, it can become a bit of a risk. So I think, going to that age-old quote, I suppose, of you can't manage what you don't monitor or have oversight on. It's really about making sure that you leverage those data points from that asset optimization perspective, and setting up those clear, I suppose, strategies to make sure that when you do see your hotel slightly underperform, or there's some red flags that you believe may be happening, actually implementing the right team to make sure that they're across whatever's happening and doing a bit of a deep dive with type 2 energy audits or whatever else it may be that they require for those strategies. And then, sorry, Matt, you go.
No, mate, go.
Sure. And then I suppose the other lens is also leveraging it to those RFP seasons, which I'm sure most of the operators on this call experience. I think especially coming out of a post-COVID environment, their level of scrutiny over your ESG data has definitely increased substantially. The list of questions we sometimes get across our desk is substantial. It's no longer just, do you have an ESG initiative or do you have an ESG program? What does that look like? With no real context boundaries or requirements. It's now very tailored and very specific. For instance, what is your carbon footprint during XYZ period? And do you have a third-party certification scheme? Yes, no, why not? When do you intend to have one? So sitting across that data and being able to extract that data in real time very quickly helps that turnover process as well, which then of course helps sales and marketing when they go out and do their engagements. So there's definitely a lot of usages from data that not only sits with the ESG team, which I think is quite valuable. And of course, investor reporting, that's amplified as well. We can see that through different regulations coming in, and they're also driving investors, especially when they're conducting due diligence on new assets. For instance, we had an investor coming from Europe actually asking all these lovely questions about what is our stranded asset risk and what does that look like? What is our net zero targets and goals? And we're able to leverage that data again for those responses. And then, as Mario mentioned as well, green loans is one of those incentive schemes. That's another big driver as well for us at the portfolio level.
And you're like, it seems like I know I hear from lots of people in the sustainability industry talking about like this data fatigue, I guess, or data burden with reporting. So I know, like, as a franchisee, you've got properties under several different brands. I mean, you're reporting on your own platform as well as other ones. And I guess I wanted to get Randy's discussion about like data usage within the industry. But I guess is that a recognized burden that you've got as someone working with ESG? Like it's something that I guess is that real? This is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely, it's a burden. And now I should say, in our work, because we're the keepers of global standards for sustainability, it's a broad, holistic set of standards. Right? So we'd love to see more data collected on everything about sustainability, not just greenhouse gases, but social issues and water and animal welfare and all the full range of sustainability. But because we're not very good at carbon and greenhouse gases, we've got some very good programs with very good consulting companies that have, their own internal software programs that they sell, but we don't have a lot that's open source. We don't have a lot of commonality. One of the sustainability people, one of the largest hotel chains in the world, told me several years ago, she said, Randy, we can't go holistic very well because on carbon alone, she said, I think we report and measure on carbon 9 different ways. We report to the EU one way, UK another way, our shareholders another way, and myriad others. That's one company struggling with carbon. So we're struggling, we're frustrated, working on holistic sustainable tourism that we can't even get past carbon. Now, really the best, probably the most propagated tool is the HCMI, Hotel Carbon Measurement Initiative of the World Sustainable Hospitality Alliance. But it's still in an Excel spreadsheet. They're going to go soon to online. So it's a wonderful tool and it's open source. But I think what we need to do is see more kind of universal tools, because there is data fatigue of having to measure and report in so many different ways. And then there's the challenge of national energy authorities have their own metrics. So HCMI is now calibrated for 30 countries, but there's 196 countries. So I think we got a long way to go. And I think, again, that's way, the industry could step up and try to figure out, let's get carbon fixed as soon as possible. But another thing I'd like to mention is that, I hear a lot from the panel about energy and this and that, but, food waste is the 3rd largest contributor to greenhouse gases in the world. To the US economy, the Chinese economy, the 3rd largest identifiable contributor is food waste. And a hotel can instantly decrease greenhouse gases for methane and carbon with simple, no cost or low cost techniques to reduce food waste, especially the breakfast buffet. And hardly anybody knows that. We're so fixated, so we've got to get past our problems of reporting. We need universal tools. We need for measurement. We need it for reporting. And we just got to get on the stick on greenhouse gases and then move on to everything else.
And I guess I know you and I discussed about this, what are the barriers, I guess, I mean, for like an owner like ProInvest, obviously they're very, part of their DNA in terms of what they're doing. They're very motivated as an owner to do this type of thing. But like, how do we move, I guess, different other ownership models, I guess, or other ownership groups who perhaps aren't as engaged? Like, I mean, do these like does the reporting and I guess the requirements and the targets need to be part of like HMAs? Like how, like what's the solution?
I'd love to see it in HMAs. I mean, our panelists represent some very progressive companies that are doing wonderful things. I would argue that's a pretty small percentage of the global population of hospitality. And we do believe in our work that the franchise model of the big international players is actually a barrier to sustainability, because the big chains may have some lovely internal programs, but they don't have the requirement to the brands to use them. It's got to get into the brand dimensions. Owners are largely ignoring it. So I said this at a conference of hotel investors in Bangkok a couple of years ago, and a few people knew. I just said that very blatantly, and it was exciting because a few people kind of got motivated and started putting in HMAs. But I think that drum needs to be banged loudly and often, because it just needs to get out there. Somebody's got to get through to the hotel owners of the world that, okay, the client may not ask for it at point of purchase, but it's showing up in satisfaction data. There's a whole demographic surge now. If you look at the market research Booking.com has done on sustainable tourism, 53%, this is 2 years ago, 53% of global travelers said they get annoyed when the service provider is not sustainable enough. So I think a lot of owners are blinded by the fact they think at point of purchase, people are fixated on price only, which is true, but it's also showing up in satisfaction data. And repeat and referral business is king in our industry. So I think the owners need to wake up and look at the changing demographic of the world, that the traveler wants a more sustainable world. And the franchise model has got to evolve, where owners of the brands, or the CEOs of the brands, got to go to the national owners meeting or international owners meeting. Say, come on, guys, we got to do this. Nobody's really done that in a significant way.
I mean, Jamie, like, Kerzner don't have a franchise model, but I guess like, is that like, would you see that as, was that realistic? Would there be any pushback from the industry? Do you think like it's sort of welcome and we just needed to get it on the table, or?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of I think all of the above. I think you're going to get pushback from the industry. Obviously, to Randy's point, it's not going to change very easily unless you mandate from the off, whether that's embedded into a HMA agreement, which I think absolutely will happen. Is it happening quickly enough? Again, Randy's point, it's, we need to bring this to the table sooner rather than later and mandate it. Again, we don't have the franchisee model. I mean, we have a full blend of owned assets, joint venture assets, dry management agreement assets. So we do tend to have a little more skin in the game in some of our projects, not all. But it's about, I suppose, what as a brand are you trying to achieve? What is your journey? What do you want to be kind of seen as? Like I don't know, a brand that springs to mind, kind of a Six Senses kind of brand identity. They kind of lead from the front and always have done, and they're well respected for that. So do all operators really want to look at that model, for example? It's very difficult when you've got kind of legacy properties to try and turn that around, but that's always kind of potentially an excuse, let's just say, and we just need to draw a line in the sand and start from scratch. And I think HMA is definitely the way forward that can get enough traction from the off.
And that, Cindy, you're a franchisee. Is that a line in the sand? Like, if all the HMAs you received had a requirement, is how like, I guess how would the ownership industry react, I guess, or what would their response be?
I think we've been mixed bag of responses, definitely. And I'm sure, as with anything, regulation or incentives, there will always be some questions and pushbacks initially. But I think we're getting to a point where we just really need to stop complaining, I suppose, and just start making actions and making those commitments and following through on those commitments as well. And I think that's where a really strong governance approach would support those considerations as well. I went to a conference recently, and one of the top CEOs of these brands mentioned they don't like a governance approach. They've actually scrapped it out of their ESG strategy because it's a little bit too rigorous, which I strongly disagree with. I believe you definitely need that level of commitment and oversight constantly over anything, even if it is included in a HMA. You need to be able to see that through strongly
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's I guess it's the point. It's like if everyone has to move, then no one is actually disadvantaged, right? And Randy, you raised a good point too, which is about sort of the guest experience and driving that. I know, Mario, that's something we were talking about. Like, is it, you know, a lot of these OTAs are actually sort of doing green ratings. So I didn't know, like, they're not all doing it. Like, which ones are actually sort of participating in this and giving us a bit of an opportunity for guests to make this selection?
Yeah, obviously, as Randy mentioned, we're seeing now several hotel booking platforms that have started already recently to include these kinds of green ratings or green certifications as part of the overall filtration and selection criteria, which only reflects the growing interest, obviously, in the sustainable travel among everyone. We already mentioned Booking.com as one of them. You already can see, as part of the platform, sustainable travel, which is kind of a badge, and hotels and accommodations are being actually assessed against this and against their efforts to reduce energy, reduce waste, reduce overall water consumption, supporting local communities, etc. The same you would see also on, Expedia, for example, Trivago, Agoda, TripAdvisor, all of these famous, really OTAs. And the thing is that hotel operators are actually being now motivated to meet these kinds of green and sustainable practices and standards so that they can be featured more in the, I would say, select kind of VIP access or, specific selection and specific filtration so that they gain also more visibility. They can attract the eco-minded kind of guests. And this is something definitely that we didn't see, 10 or 15 years ago, but we're seeing recently a lot. And this just by adopting these kinds of practices, the operators are definitely not only attracting a growing segment of eco-conscious travelers, if you want to tell them, but also they're benefiting from the overall increased visibility, the positive branding, related, of course, to the ESG. Every one of these operators, obviously, also they have their own sustainability internal requirements. They have their sustainability reporting, the annual sustainability reporting that they need to do. So all of this plays a big role in eventually attracting more and more people and showing the added value, let's say, and the differentiator against all of the other operators out there. So this is definitely a trend that is growing more and more, which is great, which is very positive.
It reminds me of, I think, Cindy, I was going to ask you a question later on about the sort of the certification plans you've got for the group. But before we sort of go to that, Randy, I just wanted, given, I guess, you've done some work with these OTAs in terms of like green rankings, like is the consumer educated enough in order for this to make a difference to drive? Is there problems with this approach? Like, is it a good thing that's happening, or is there more work to be done? Like, what's happening, I guess, because all of these platforms, they aren't equal, right? And the customers have a different level of sophistication and understanding what's going on.
I think there's about 5 yeses there. Yes. It's growing. It's improving. It's got a ways to go in improvement. The customer wants it. It's confusing. There's different approaches, and we worked with most of the large ones, including Booking.com for quite several years, and Traveloka and Agoda and others. And they have a little bit different shade. Booking was using Booking.com currently. The highest score you can get to get the badge Booking is be certified by a certification body we've accredited. Accreditation is a level above certification. It's an external review of certification. And then the next highest level is an entity that has their standard aligned with ours. And then they were using their own survey with some kind of AI review or verification of it. But in March, I think it was about March, early this year, the Dutch government shut them down based on not the pending EU Green Claims Directive, which is not in force yet, but the existing Unfair Competitive Practices Directive of the European Union, and forced them to throw away most of the badges, which they had an enormous volume. So this is where regulation is really entering in. So the Booking.com program overnight, I think it was March, just went from a large one to a very small one. So that ties back into what we talked about, regulatory pressure. So they're all trying to have some kind of scoring system. They've all put good logic behind them. But because we don't have a lot of pickup of true certification, and honestly, the reason that those UN agencies that created us, they not only wanted us to create global standards, but they wanted us to create really the only accreditation of good certification in the world. Accreditation, again, is a layer above. We know of some 400 eco labels for hotels. Almost all of them have no external review. You have no idea the quality. The term certification in hospitality, we believe, is used wildly too loosely, wildly. So I challenge everyone listening today to question the very word certification when they hear it. So we're applying ISO-based auditing practices and standards, just like everything else in every other sector uses the term certification. We're trying to drag this industry into international norms. That's where the national regulators, when they study this, they love us because if the Ministry of Tourism talks to the people down the hall at Standards Board, they said, oh yeah, we got to do this. And then they study it and they find us, and we're the only player doing a proper external review. So we think that's going to be on the rise. In the meantime, back to the OTAs, because there's not big numbers, they have to be creative about putting something together. So good for them experimenting with it. They're all going to be subject to regulatory pressure on how they do it because they have to be so bloody creative to do something. So I feel that all these brands we just mentioned are earnest. They really want to do something proper, rigorous, but they don't have a lot to go by. So and I would argue not much of hospitality is very sustainable. So we got to work on better systems. So we just got to get a lot more pickup across the board.
It's a good little segue too. You said, like, encouraging guests to question and ask questions. So, which is generally a good thing. And also, guys, I just remember people who are tuning in, we do have a Q&A section in the discussion point here. So if you have questions for the panelists at the end of the section, drop them in there, and we can see if we can get to them at the end of the point and end of the session. And this chat about certification, as I was saying, Cindy, like, you guys are sort of on this journey where you're looking at it for across platform. I mean, like, is relevance to the OTA one of the factors you guys considered? How have you looked at, like, how have you, I know you're still in the process, but how have you tried to, like, choose between the different options you've got in terms of certifying for the whole platform?
Absolutely. Well, we started this process probably about 18 to 24 months ago. And we only made a decision probably in December of last year, before these big conversations around the OTAs really came into play. But one thing that we definitely tried to consider was our stakeholders and how does this actually benefit all of them. So over the course of that, so it's 18 months or so, we went through the minefield that Randy mentioned of the different certification schemes out there in the market. We compared all of them and ended up narrowing down to a top 6 of what would actually be beneficial for our fund hotels, and how would that actually be beneficial to our investors and our guests as well. And not only that, but our operating procedures too. There's definitely a lot of schemes out there, and each of them have the pros and cons. And I don't believe we have found a scheme or certification scheme just yet that tick all the boxes. I don't think there will be a scheme that ticks all the boxes for everyone. But it's definitely about selecting the ones that meet the needs of your organization, your hotel portfolio as well, which we naturally had to consider, given that we've got both new builds as well as refurbished assets. So, for instance, as a comparison, one recently opened about 12 months ago. So it's brand new, it's fresh, it's shiny, it's great. Everyone's very excited. Another one is a 1930s building that's heritage listed. So there's a big spread that we had to accommodate for. So going through that, we definitely looked at all the different angles. And then once we made our decision, we started hearing about all these OTA discussions, which I would say added another layer of benefit for going down this pathway. Certainly to get our hotel managers on board as well, given that there's multiple stakeholders that you need to consider when you start implementing a process such as this. And it's definitely helped the conversations and also speed up the involvement and traction also, which is always great. But no, one thing that we've noticed so far in terms of the implementation is also the benefits across the organization that this scheme has had. For us, we don't see it as a tick box approach, and I believe that would be the incorrect approach if you're pursuing a certification scheme, because there's a lot of work involved with it, evidence-based audits, improvement strategy, and so forth. So it's really about seeing how you can leverage those insights for long-term improvement strategy. And we've seen that how we can potentially trickle that down to our CapEx plans for our asset management team. What can we do when we go through these requirements? For instance, faucets, urinals, what are their well star ratings currently, which is a current topic I'm having with our auditors. But basically being able to be across those components and then also going, okay, well, what can we do to improve when we do go through those refurbishments for future projects or even existing ones? Even TV star energy rating qualities. Is that part of your procurement plan? It's all these little bits and pieces that when you put them all together, it really helps amplify your holistic sustainability strategy. And even food waste that Randy mentioned before as well, being really across that and seeing the different optimization mechanisms that you can use. And you can definitely use those certification schemes as a roadmap to improve, which will definitely have benefit for your overall net zero strategy as well.
No, it's a good point. I mean, I know, like I was going to ask Jamie about this too, because I know in discussions we've had, like linking back to your certification and KPIs for your on-site management team, right? So, Cindy talked about it being part of a procurement strategy, TVs and urinals, all that sexy stuff. But then, like you guys as well, like you've actually got it linked with KPIs for the on-site management as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was our probably biggest win, if I'm honest. We struggled to get traction in year one and decided to plug that into back to Cindy's point about general managers getting their buy-in. Once they're bought in, especially through financially driven KPIs potentially, we found the traction was immediate. It wasn't weeks and months, it was immediate. So we found that was really just helped us elevate from really not doing so great to really getting to a place where 5 years ago we didn't even have a sustainability platform as an operator. It's now mandatory. It's now mandatory for all brand new opening hotels to be certified at the base level within 3 months of opening. It's mandatory that year on year they regain certification, and all this is plugged back into property KPIs, which I think has been such almost a silent revelation, if I'm honest.
And the other point to remember you talking about as well is that like you're looking at CapEx plans both from ROI as well as from carbon footprint.
Yeah,
and that's like a
definitely.
little bit of that's something new too, right? Like 5 years ago, you only would have made CapEx decisions based on ROI.
It's purely business related decisions. This year we've started again as part of our, we're on a journey as everybody else is. I'm sure we've got the baseline, the platform of our sustainability initiatives, and the EarthCheck platform is there. We've got data now, so we're now holding properties accountable when they're doing their 5-year CapEx projections. Which of these projects fall under a green initiative, if you like? So obviously it's a very broad term. What does that mean? So it's looking at reduction of carbon footprint, because we found that reduction of utilities was getting a flat line, and then some properties were doing things that were fantastic, some properties were doing things that they basically shouldn't be doing. So for my visits, and I also have an internal audit trail for each property that I conduct myself annually, so not only being across the sustainability platform but understanding properties pretty well technically, understanding how they operate and how they claim to operate, and making sure that they're as robust as possible, because the EarthCheck platform is a third party audited certified process, so it brings its own merits. So I want to make sure that we're aligned with that process. It's been a journey, but I think after 3-4 years of KPI setting, I think we are pretty much in a pretty good place.
Because it's like it's a lot about sort of understanding, I guess, that process. And Mario, I was going to ask you about, like, if we've got hotel owners or property owners here, about sort of if they're looking to try and put their property or their platform on their portfolio on a net zero path, like can you give us some color, I guess, on how they would do the approach, or what they should be tackling first?
Yeah, definitely. So Obviously, the whole decarbonization process of any property, hotel property here specifically, we have a structured approach that we go for just to make sure that all aspects of the hotel's operations and infrastructure are being addressed. Obviously, the first step is to assess and plan, do an energy audit, supposing that we're talking about an existing building here. So we need to conduct a comprehensive energy audit just to understand the current energy consumption patterns and identify key areas for improvement, trying to understand where do we sit when it comes to the carbon footprint of this building that we have, collect data as much as possible. And it's just going back also to your previous discussions regarding data, and I know that we've also discussed this before. This is one of the key challenges that we actually have here in the MENA region, lack of proper data, really, which significantly affects I would say that the achievement of any kind of goal or vision or target that you want to implement. And we really need to address this kind of data deficit that we have in terms of improving data collection. Now, there are already initiatives that are taking place now. Dubai municipality is starting with a building classification survey, where all the buildings need to report on their carbon emissions and even waste and everything else. But I think it's a very good start, but still there's a big data gap that we work with in the region. And this is something definitely that we need to address so that we can have more informed decision making and more effective policy implementation. Even it's very essential for attracting investors out there. So it's just between brackets, which is going back to the structured approach. So conducting an energy audit is something that's very important. First, setting the goals and objectives, and then obviously starting with putting a reduction plan, which involves looking at the building envelope improvements from insulation, facade, windows, roof, high performance glazing, HVAC systems optimization, obviously BMS systems, efficient lighting. There are several low-hanging fruits that are actually very easy, more or less, to have. So this is something that we definitely look at. What we do also is we try to implement as much as possible advanced technologies in terms of performance simulation studies and try to integrate energy modeling and other simulation software in order to accurately predict first the current carbon footprint of the project as it stands, and then integrating different scenarios of different energy conservation measures and see how each scenario will actually reduce the overall carbon footprint, and trying to reach even what we call a digital twin, which eventually tells you how would the building actually be operating in case of any scenario being implemented on it. Trying to reduce as much as possible this carbon footprint, and then look at how we can offset the remaining carbon footprint through integrating renewable energy, either on-site renewable energy or off-site renewable energy, doing an assessment and study of what are different alternatives that we can. Obviously looking at water management, waste management, sustainable procurement practices, because it's not just about the building by itself, it's also about the operations. It's about the supply chain, it's about the procurement, it's about what kind of equipment, what kind of furnishings, what kind of materials you're actually handling, having a very sustainable and robust supply chain, partnering with suppliers. And I think this is something very important, so that the suppliers as well, they can adhere to your sustainability objectives and principles. And then staff is something very important also in terms of educating the staff, training the staff, because you might very well be implementing the latest technologies and the latest BMS measures, but at the end of the day, if you don't educate and train the staff in a very crucial and clear way, then all of this would just go to waste. So staff training is very important, engaging the guests as well, and trying to inform the guests about different sustainability initiatives, encourage them to participate in these energy saving practices. I was last week in Bangalore, and the hotel I was staying in, you would see just a very small, practical, they call it a sustainability green guide, which tells you about the different practices in this hotel. It was a LEED certified hotel. It tells you about the overall net zero carbon journey of the operator. It tells you about the different elements and measures that are there integrated as part of your individual room or the overall services within the hotel. And I think this is something very, very important, trying to engage the guests in this journey. And then obviously the end would be monitoring and reporting as accurately as possible the overall carbon footprint that you have, trying to implement an energy management system to try to continuously monitor this energy consumption and identifying any kinds of or any areas for improvement in real time as much as possible. So just this is in summary overall the steps that we go for.
I think you've covered it all, mate. That was
Hopefully.
impressive. It was extremely comprehensive. And I like that point too, where I think we can move to case studies because there's a good one that Cindy's got where but your point about like putting this sort of journey as part of your guest experience as well. And I know that seems to be something that ProInvest have done. I think Cindy, you were talking about how you're, with some of the work you're doing with water reduction and basically advising that with like telling the guests about doing that and telling them how they can I guess be part of that journey as well, which is like an interesting thing. It's sort of wrapping the user experience into what you're trying to do for sustainability. And I think, I don't know, is that you were doing that on the Flinders project, which is your case study, or I can't remember?
But across all of our properties, we've implemented a few various trials, just really depending on also the level of hotel. For instance, if you go from a select service property, your communication strategy might be a little bit different compared to a Kimpton. If it's a luxury lifestyle property. But no, definitely one of the key things that we look at, we actually have a ESG ethos called One Earth Countless Experiences. And what that looks at, which is also embedded in our Fund 2 ESG policy, which we need to activate as part of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation involvement, is really looking at how do we pull in the guest throughout the sustainability journey from, I suppose, that brand conception, really understanding that the property firstly exists, through to the booking platform, checking in, the stay, check out, and then post communication strategies as well. And some of the things that we do is even trying to build brand awareness around, for instance, a neighbours energy and water scheme and what we've done at that property. So for majority of the hotels, whenever you go and stay there, there'll be a nice lovely plaque at the beginning of the entrance of the hotel stating what level of energy or water rating it's achieved during that 12-month period. And then as you progress through the hotel, for some of the hotels that we implemented a trial with, was actually having these little information cards about various touch points that we have across the hotel. One of which specified the water efficiency levels of the showers relative to your standard hotel as well, and how much water that particular shower is saving them per minute, and then challenging those hotel guests as well to, I suppose, reduce their length of showers in the most nicest and possible way as well. So it's just little bits and pieces that we've implemented and that we continue to monitor their effectiveness as well. For instance, that communication probably won't go down too well in a luxury hotel where people would be showering for very long periods of time, but for a bit more business orientated property, it definitely works, and people are very interested to hearing about that.
Yeah, the level of service, I guess, is a key one when you're trying to do this right, is how does it matches. But I mean, it's not to say on high level properties it's not possible. I mean, Jamie talked before about Six Senses, but I mean, like Jamie, I wanted to jump to your case study on the Atlantis, which is like on a scale probably above most hotels in the world.
I wanted to just I'll touch very briefly, just quickly, plugging this property specifically into the sustainability, and we're talking about suitability to sustainability platforms. Cindy touched on it earlier about, finding the right fit for ProInvest. And I think it was a journey for us finding the right fit for us. But where we have a sustainability platform that's really guided towards hospitality, Atlantis has, as per the Guinness World Records, has the biggest water park in the world. So do we plug the water park into the hotel element, because that pushes the figures to a point where, you know, it's really unrealistic. So part of our sustainability tracking for Atlantis specifically is we split water park to hotel, just to make sure that the figures remain as accurate as possible. So I just thought that was worth sharing. Yeah, as far as this case study, I thought I would share Atlantis being the beast that it is. Over 1,500 guest rooms in this beautiful property. We've removed to date, I think from end of 2022 up to very recently, almost 8.2 million 330 milliliter plastic bottles out of circulation. We're looking to expand this project as well. This is purely the bottles that are left within guest rooms for their consumption within the room only. This doesn't touch the F&B element as well. So this could potentially grow, you know, 3-4 fold from its current capacities. Obviously, this affects the supply chain, the storage, the cooling. Yes, there's handling elements still involved because we still need to produce, we still need to deliver, store and deliver internally, but it does touch on potentially our scope 3 emissions. It drills back then into our overall carbon footprint. So yeah, I just thought that this was a really good case study to share.
Yeah, no, it's super cool, mate. I've never had the pleasure of staying there, but I'm going to Dubai probably later this year, so I'll see if Kundal will well, I don't know, it might be a little outside of budget, we'll see. But it's
I'm sure we could do something.
Mario sort me out. Excellent.
We could do something. Sure.
And Mario, I was going to ask too, because I wanted then to show too, because we're in terms of net zero, like, you know, planning out, I guess, journey and pathways, like, you know, Jamie and Cindy talking about like sort of at individual asset level, but like some of the more interesting work we're doing is actually sort of at city sort of levels. So this is like, you know, downtown Doha.
Yeah, exactly. So that's actually a very interesting one that we're currently working on. We've started already since almost a year now. So this involves actually a decarbonization pathway that we're doing for the overall downtown of Doha for Shared Properties, who is kind of a semi-governmental institution, if you want, part of Qatar Foundation, and in line with the national vision of Qatar. And the decarbonization vision of Qatar, they wanted obviously to, you know, take the lead and see how they can decarbonize all of their assets and all of their carbon footprint as a property owner and as a property developer. So a big part of them obviously is all of these existing buildings that you can see. So we're talking about more than 100 buildings, and already all of them LEED Gold certified actually, and recent ones, but still they want to put a decarbonization pathway for this, and this obviously led us to undertake several energy audits across the different portfolios so that we can establish a detailed feasibility and energy saving rollout plans for these. Now, obviously, this is kind of a 12-month approach that we have taken. And like I said, we have undertaken several sample energy audits. There are already several hospitality buildings as part of this portfolio of buildings. And it's kind of going through a 7-step approach from obviously scoping strategy first, looking at the different scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions that we have, carbon data collection, very challenging again. And then going through the audits, putting a reduction strategy with a specific time frame, green energy and offsetting plan for renewable energy, and how to try to increase the overall part of renewable energy that is feeding into this city. And then obviously even putting a guidance for any new projects that the developer would like actually even to develop, whether there or anywhere else that they have direct control over. So it's a very interesting kind of decarbonization strategy and approach. And we're actually seeing this more and more now in the region. Developers, organizations, even governmental institutions coming to us to help them with the overall decarbonization pathway that they have whether for hospitality buildings or other kind of
Yep.
buildings in line with the national visions of the different countries.
And you touched on scope 1, 2, and 3, which I'm looking at the Q&As, which are filtering in too. So we'll flag that for a couple of people to answer. I think, Randy, just before we sort of move on to Q&A, you mentioned this bit of work at the start of at the top of the discussion, but very interesting approach by Singapore, very integrated approach. Could you talk us through, I guess, what the SBT has been doing?
Yeah, it's big, but I'll try to be quick. So my case study is not a property, but a program, because this is what we do. And STB, Singapore Tourism Board, has taken a very progressive approach with what they're doing. And it's part of a national strategy of net zero for the entire economy. So there's a mandate from above that all sectors are moving in this space. So we're working with them first in terms of their own management of the destination, and then on hospitality, and now we're moving into MICE and attractions and other aspects. It's a very interesting and comprehensive program. So you can see the targets that they've set. So the ultimate target is 2050 net zero emissions, and then some steps along the way to get there. The middle one for 2025 is where they engage us, because they want by next year 60% of their hotel room stock to be certified by international certification bodies, and they actually subsidize that certification that we've accredited. So they appreciate our program for a good external review of good certification. So it's very rigorous. And that's working brilliantly. A number of very progressive brands, Ascot and Pan Pacific and others, very active. And some of them are going for, well, the two I just mentioned, Ascot and Pan Pacific, have targets to go beyond Singapore, their entire portfolio to be certified in the coming years. So through the whole inspiration, this is carrot, not stick, because there's subsidies and not mandates, like I mentioned earlier in Turkey, but because Singapore also has a very progressive government activist, government supporting skills training, we offer training to the hotel staff that's subsidized as well. Again, through our friends with Ascot and with others. And so there's just a holistic approach. They've engaged SHA, the Sustainable Hotel Association, to get their buy-in. So there's workshops, there's training. And then, I think they recognize as a community then too, that ultimately they can help promote the entire destination as more sustainable, with a very high percentage of their hotel properties getting good third-party certification. So that's it. So and that's quite typical in our work, where a government will have its own net zero targets and then work with us on the holistic side of sustainability. And so that's the win-win, right? Get at net zero on carbon and greenhouse gases and have that focus, but then also work holistically. So this is sort of our dream scenario.
And it links quite nicely with something, because I said there's a couple of questions. Thanks everyone. There's a really, really good case studies, guys. Thank you for putting those together. I appreciate it. And I was going to open up now to a little bit of the Q&A, and the one that sort of popped up that I thought was mentioned in some of these responses too was, how do we define different scopes 1, 2, and 3 for hospitality? So scope 1, 2, and 3, and should emissions from travel be factored into hotel emissions? So I know, Cindy, I know with ProInvest, you guys are doing SBTI on your Fund 3, and you've said very candidly that scope 3 is tough. Like, how, I guess, like how are you guys finding this measurement of scope 1, 2, and 3, and how you can set targets?
Absolutely. It's definitely been a process, which we're working with your industry colleagues with as well. In terms of the guidelines, we're really relying heavily on the science-based targets initiatives and their standards and how they define scope 1, 2, and 3. And so working also through what is applicable and contextual for our particular hotel and fund. So one thing I would say is some of those scopes would be applicable, especially when you go into the scope 3 category. Some may not be within the boundaries of your control, so they may be scrapped out. But what I would say is for scope 3 emissions and the travel question, it depends on which travel they're necessarily speaking to, But I could say on the employee commuting and traveling and using hotels and airlines to sort of feed into that scope 3 capture, it's quite challenging to obtain that data if you don't already have a predefined system to capture it. So we've actually had to go a two-pronged approach where we've leveraged our system that our corporate traveler system that majority of our employees and execs use to record their travel, coupled with lovely email trails of, I've booked this flight to Dubai and X, Y, and Z, and then trying to hand that over to Kundal for Kundal to make those estimations on what that scope 3 inventory actually looks like. I would say probably about 60% of the data we were able to obtain from our own records. So this is a rough guide. The remaining 40%, we really need to be able to estimate that data and use benchmarks in the industry to help us inform that as well. Because again, if you haven't encountered this approach before, you may not necessarily sit on all those data points already as is. And I think scope 3 in particular for the industry is very, very challenging. And I've spoken to some of the larger hotel chains, your IHGs and Accors of the world, and even they're grappling with scope 3 emissions and trying to get that all funneled up in a clear and accurate way as well.
Randy, I think you were talking about one of the initiatives, I think you were saying so with Prince Harry or Prince William that was doing, and was looking at hotels and the airline industry. So, and the difference between, I guess, they were trying to get some carbon emissions benchmarking basically across those two big sort of sectors, part of travel, and success in one and not in the other. Could you speak to a little bit to that? I can't remember the name of the initiative off the top of my head.
It's called Travel List.
That's right.
And it's a play on words where they're trying to put travel and catalyst together. So the travel has two A's, not the E in the second syllable. It's Prince Harry, not William. And so he convinced a number of distributors some years ago to sign a pledge to work together non-competitively in aviation and hospitality to improve sustainability. So the original four were TripAdvisor, Trip.com, Booking.com, and did I say TripAdvisor? I'm sorry, there are four. Anyway, it's grown. Google Travel's involved, several are involved, Expedia's involved. And so they've been working with, they actually work together on sharing back to the house methodologies, which is fabulous because the world needs that non-competitive sharing of technology. So to be candid, I think they're doing extremely well on aviation, and they're doing rather well, not quite as good on accommodations. And I think their challenges have to do a lot of things we've talked about, at least things I've talked about, the franchise model, the disparity of this enormous industry that doesn't have cohesive reporting and measurement tools. So they struggle with that. I have to quickly insert though, when you think about scope 3, so hotels are somebody else's scope 3. And so we really work that angle. We talk to the business travel community and leisure travel when they're contracting the hotel. If that hotel has in place a good, meaningful third-party certification, that's some evidence of scope 3. So that's something for scope 3 is hard for everyone. But that's an angle of it that we don't see. But anyway, back to your question. Yeah, Travel List is the entity, and there's movement there. But again, they're challenged with some of the same issues we've been discussing.
There's another that came in too, which is like, there's one which is like, how important is embodied carbon, and are we measuring the carbon footprint of our hotels? I guess the first part, Mario, like, how important is embodied carbon? And I think I know the answer, but I'd be keen to get your thoughts. Yeah.
I mean, embodied carbon is something that we're definitely looking at the onset of any new design that we have for any new project. It's not just about operational carbon. You cannot actually reach net zero carbon without looking at embodied carbon and without looking at even from the onset of the concept structure of any kind of project that you have, the materials that you are using, the whole supply chain, which I already mentioned before, also looking at different ways in order to reduce the overall transportation of these materials, the use of these materials, the recycled, the regional materials, the low emitting materials. These are all things that we always look at, obviously. It's harder to monitor, it's harder to manage, obviously. It's a bit more difficult also to understand sometimes, even from suppliers or other consultants in the industry, but it's definitely something that we are heavily looking at, and even trying to simplify more or less or automate, I would say, the process of coming up with the actual embodied energy and embodied carbon figures of different materials, different designs that we're looking at. Just also one comment going back to the scope 3 emissions, which I mean, obviously I second everything that Cindy and Randy also mentioned regarding scope 3, but I think from an hotel industry, and probably the person who asked the question regarding how do you actually measure scope 3 for the hotel industry probably was hinting to the fact that you have all of these guests that are traveling. We just need to be, I would say, a bit logical in the sense that we need to look at the type of the industry by itself and link the scope 3 to whatever makes sense in this industry. So obviously you cannot factor in the travels from the guests to the hotel industry because there's no alternative, whereas for employees, for staff, you are looking at ways to reduce this carbon footprint. Whereas guests, you cannot just tell guests not to travel, for example, or not to come to this hotel, because otherwise the whole industry wouldn't really make sense. So we just need to be logical in the way that we are actually looking at these scope 3 emissions and trying to make sense of what works and what doesn't work. And of course, trying to also encourage airline industry to reduce their own carbon footprint so that this also affects the overall process and the overall chain.
Yeah, well said, well said. I know with the embodied carbon question too, it's been really interesting, like in the 10 years, looking at the percentage of embodied versus operational carbon changing as like buildings get more efficient, grids decarbonize, embodied carbon becoming more and more important because it occupies just a bigger percentage of the total emissions for the building.
Of course.
we got probably time for one more question. Jamie, I was going to give you a nice easy one, which is like, what do you hang on, there's a couple here. So okay, this is a good one. So what's the most effective strategies for hotels and resorts to reduce carbon emissions whilst maintaining luxury standards?
Ooh, $1 million question, right there.
Exactly.
Yeah, one of the key drivers for me, and I think one of the messages I give to all of our engineering teams on the ground really is the projects that we do must, in essence, never affect the guest experience to a degree, whatever that means. Quite a broad message. Low flow devices, does the guest actually understand that that's what's happening? No, as long as it's a comfortable experience, who cares? We've reduced water consumption by 80% in some instances with guests none the wiser, for example. Yep. Is anybody aware that we're tweaking up or changing room temperatures by 0.5 degree, 1 degree? No. So it's just these small changes I find really make impact. But for me is the bigger back of house kind of modifications, again, as an owner, client, operator, and all of the kind of different badges that we wear. I see lots of different opportunities for, when we have failed assets, such as a chiller, for example, a 20-year-old chiller, then I'm insisting then that we put in, heat recovery units. We're trying to really leverage the latest tech where we can that's got genuine ROIs attached to it now. So it's really more interesting to the business now more than ever to do these technical projects, kitchen extraction, heat recovery systems again, they're really taking off as well. So I think there's lots of things that we can do. How do we heat a swimming pool? How do we cool a swimming pool? How are we achieving that? It's really wasteful, let's be honest, but it's how we're minimizing the impacts and really trying to drag down our carbon footprint year on year. And I think using the sustainability platform data that we have, I'm using that data back to the point we had earlier about driving KPIs of carbon reduction, but using the data gleaned from the platform that everybody plugs into. So it's having that kind of circular kind of reduction economy, if you like. So and also holding projects accountable for what they've claimed at the offset to get commercial buy-in. You know, they've claimed an ROI of 2.7 years, 2.8 years, 3 years, whatever that number is, but making sure we revisit that post-project completion once everything's settled down, you know, testing and commissioning and glitches, etc. Once that's running kind of normally, how we can then go back to the business and say, hey, you know, we promised you an ROI of 2.8, we're actually looking at 2.4, or equally, it wasn't as successful as we would have dreamt of, so therefore, you know, this is not a project we consider in the future. So it's closing that loop, I suppose, from a technical standpoint for me.
Very good. Very good. What gets measured gets managed. Don't affect the guest experience, and, you know, revisit basically effectiveness. Nice.
Absolutely.
Guys, we are pretty much almost out of time for this session. I thank you very much for everyone for taking part. There was a few more questions that actually came in at the end there, guys, but we're pretty much at time for everyone. I will say that if you have any additional questions, please do reach out and contact us. We are going to be sending out to everyone that signed up a little summary piece and a link to the recording for the session of people who want to refer to. So that'll be hitting people's inboxes in sort of the next couple of days. But thank you, Cindy, Randy, Jamie, and Mario, for a really good discussion on, you know, hospitality's net zero journey. It's been a really good chat.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks,
for
everybody.
great moderation.
Thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks to everyone at home.
Cheers.
Speak to you all soon. Bye.
Take care.